Okay guys, want to share with you today a quick video about the proportions of the human head for starters. This is meant to be a very generic formula for creating a decent human head. Just remember that the thing that makes portraiture so interesting is the variety of shapes, faces, and head sizes. Everybody's a little bit different. My own head and portrait is going to look nothing like Andre the Giant or Hulk Hogan, and that's what makes us all unique individuals. So keep that in mind when we're giving a formula. It's not meant to be universal by any means. When I start out with drawing a head from the front, now this is just more or less from the imagination. I've got a bit of an image I'm looking at, and I actually will give you these in the handouts. I tend to start with a circle, and I try to make that as perfect of a circle as I can, meaning the extreme width at the widest point should be about the same as the height. So I extended mine a little tall, that's fine, as long as it's close to a true circle. That's going to be the cranium, where the brain's located, that round top part of the skull. Now, what I tend to do after that is give myself a bit of a jaw underneath, so all the way down to the chin. What I'm looking at here is roughly jaw-shaped, almost. If you start to make your jawline look a little bit like a balloon right now, that's fine. Looks a little like an alien. For starters, we're just getting a very basic shape, basic form. Now, how far do you extend this chin? It's a little bit of I go by feel. But overall, the extreme width here, the widest point, if I took that wide point and I checked it against the length, I should be hitting about roughly 3/4 of the way up this head to 2/3, somewhere around here. So I'm in pretty good shape. It should be much taller than it is, or quite a bit taller than it is wide. And I'm gonna give him just a little more length right here. All right, so there's our jawline. Now again, you can see where somebody who's a little bit of a, bigger boned person, heavier set person is probably going to be a slightly wider shaped face. Some people are gonna have a long, narrow face, so it just depends on the person we're drawing. This is meant to be pretty generic. Now keep in mind too, when I make this circle shape, later on, and we'll lock this all down, but the base of the circle, I leave it in here because that should be about where the bottom of my nose is, somewhere in here, and I'll show you that in just a second. So again, head shape. First thing after I do that is a straight line down the middle, roughly. That's gonna be the line that splits your eyebrows, your nose, your lips, right down the middle. You can check yourself and just make sure, am I right about central from right to left? Looking pretty good. Here's a tricky part that most people tend to eyeball a little bit wrong. So I'm gonna try to eyeball a line square down the middle from point A to B, the top of the skull here and the bottom of the chin. Now I'm gonna check myself because I tend to get this a little bit off. So I'm gonna check top to bottom. I'm a little low. So right around there is where we wanna be, roughly. Double check. Okay, that line I just drew should be the eye line. Now, most of you, if you're looking at this and you're anything like me when I first heard this, you might be thinking like, that looks like an awfully big forehead. And it does right now, but keep in mind, we're gonna add all kinds of things, eyebrows, hairline, that's gonna make this look more human in just a second. So the line of the eyes right here, this is the midline. Now I'm gonna draw a similar head, but in like a excuse me guys, I'm moving my drawing board. I'm gonna draw a similar head over to the right, but in a 3/4 view. So if you guys wanna do this on your own drawing, if you're kind of following along, feel free. But what I'm gonna do is lock in a line, so that's my chin line. I'm trying to keep this straight and level. It's not gonna be perfect, but doing my best to stay more or less level. So top of the head, bottom of the chin, and my eye line. Just trying to keep this pretty consistent as I work my way across here. Okay, beautiful. So that's gonna keep the head over on this side more or less in the same kind of space. So for right now, I'm gonna focus in on this frontal view though. Middle line here. Once I get that locked in, there's a million ways you could start this, to be honest. I'm going to very lightly sketch in where I think the eyeballs are going to start. Now, This is a little dicey, a little tricky, because you have to be careful when you do this. I'm pretty good at guesstimating where these should go. And for starters, just like little almondy shapes. Now I'll show you why that's wrong in a second. We'll make those a little more clean shapes, but for now, this would be the top of the eyelid. Now when I place them, I don't want to put them too close together or too far apart. A general rule of thumb is that the width of one eyeball, there should be the same amount of space between both eyes. So if I looked at the corner of the left eye, the corner of the right eye, one, they should be about equal distance to that middle line of the face, but also this space in between the eyes should be exactly the same, roughly, as your right eye, which should be about the same as your left. And I did a pretty good job of estimating. Again, I've done this quite a bit. Now that should also be relatively, not perfectly, but relatively the same amount of space as what you have to the right and to the left of the eye. So it looks like I may have extended mine a little too big. Let's double check this. Got a little too much space to the right. Let's see. Just a little too much space to the left. So what that tells me is I could probably bring my eyes over just a little closer to center. Okay, just cleaning that up a little bit to give a little more room on the side. It's a hard thing to guesstimate because we have none of the other features just yet. But generally speaking, eyelids are placed. Now that means the actual line of the brow is going to be somewhere up a little bit higher. So I'm going to very gingerly put in a line here where we're going to draw some eyebrows in just a second. So eyebrows, eyeballs. Right now, since our person's looking a little weird here, I'm going to go ahead and finish off the bottom scoop of the eye to make those feel a little bit more eyeballish. Very light and loose for now. We'll talk about making those a little bit even more particular in just a second. Okay, so for now, at least we have some eyeball shapes starting to come in. When it comes to eyeball positioning with the rest of the features, let's take a look at one. I'm going to double check myself. Chin to the eyes, eye to the forehead, or top of the head, sorry. Okay, I'm looking a little long on this chin right now, maybe, assuming that the top of our head is right here. Let's double check that. Eye to the top of the head. Eye to the chin. We're pretty close. So somewhere right around here is perfect. Might have extended that just a little bit low. We'll find out. Now, a good rule of thumb, this isn't perfect, but pretty close, is that the nose is going to be somewhere in the halfway range between the eyes and the chin. Now, this will change for everybody, 100%, but roughly speaking, I like to say around the halfway point. So what I mean by that is, all right, chin to nose, nose to eye line. Ooh, I'm a little bit high there. Let me double check something real quick. Okay, I'm not too far off. So chin to nose, nose to eyebrow, that's not a bad place to be. Now this is where it's going to totally depend on our model as to how long their nose is. There are plenty of people who have very short noses, plenty of people who have a longer nose. But relatively speaking, this is about the halfway point. Looking like right now it's the halfway point from chin to the nose, and then from nose to the eye, upper eyelid or eyebrow line. Somewhere in there is kind of going to be perfect for me. So that's where I want to put the base of the nose for right now. So just to make this person look a little less weird here, I'm going to do a couple things. One is I'm going to start to place the actual bridge of the nose coming in. So for starters, when I say the bridge of the nose, what I mean is the actual kind of like bone of the nose coming down. Now this is going to look a little bit like an old Roman helmet, like where they had the nose plate to protect the nose. So this is going to be the front surface of the nose. Bear with me. I know it's a little bit weird. There's going to be a bit of a bend in space somewhere right along the eye line, maybe a little bit higher than the eye line. That is where the nose starts to join up and bridge into the forehead, or the brow line, I should say. So now we're looking like a bit of a Y shape. All right, bridge of the nose. Again, bear with me. It's going to look weird for just a minute. Okay, So what I've done is I've made a bit of a scoop shape to a rounded form right in here, a little bit above the base of my nose. The reason for that is I'm now going to look at the very base or underside of the nose. For most of the time, if we're looking straight on at a person, we'll be able to see a little bit of the bottom plane of their nose, something like this. So that's going to be the bottom half of the nose. To help give us a sense of space, I'm going to lightly shade that for you. Okay, so now hopefully it's looking just a bit more nose-like. So these would be the nostrils, kind of flaring up, rounding up to the sides. Looking on in a straight-on view, the edge planes of the nose are going to be pretty slim, so nothing too wide. And they're going to come up and join right just inside the corner of the eye, somewhere in here. Now let's see if I've scrunched the eyes. The eyes are looking a little closer together now that I have a nose there in between. I might have pulled those in a little bit close, so I'm just going to make sure the corners of my eyes aren't encroaching too much on the nose. This is important. You don't want those eyeballs to look like they're almost growing right out of the side of the nose. That can be a weird thing. All right. Beautiful. Now I've given myself a little space around the nose. Let that breathe just a tiny bit. Okay. Eyeballs, the nose itself. Now it's important to remember that the way I just built the nose was kind of a 3D way of building it. It's the same thing if you were drawing the nose to the side, which we'll talk about in just a second. I always think of it in three main shapes: the bridge, the base of the nose, and then the side. So this would be more of a, maybe a slightly 3/4 view. Again, if we were shading it, that would be that bottom portion. If you can break the nose out into that sort of a simple, it's almost like a trapezoid style shape, I don't want to say you're never going to go wrong, but it's going to be much easier for you to start to build in the individual features. Now, I'm not going to get crazy specific about the details of the eyes, the nose, and the lips just yet in this round of drawings. I want this to be kind of short and sweet, just to get the features in their right places. Later on, we're going to talk more detail on the individual features. Okay. From there, don't forget our midline. It's getting a little bit on the light side now compared to these other things, but I haven't forgotten it. This runs straight down the middle of the nose, straight through the eyebrows. Speaking of eyebrows, let's take a look at those. This was the line of my brow here. When it comes to the eyebrow, most people's eyebrows, this depends on how heavy your brow is, but would start just above the corner of the eye, maybe just a little closer in toward the middle. But what I like to do generally is there's going to be a slight uphill line. It's going to slightly taper off and maybe curve even just a little bit downhill. These are super subtle lines that I'm drawing here. Nothing too, I'm going to shade this just to show you where I am. Nothing too aggressive. If you start to change the angle too much, you'll get an angry face or, like an expression you may not want. Now everybody's angle to the brow is a little bit different. So all I'm going to do on this side is try to capture something slightly similar over here. So again, slight uphill, kind of rounds out, tapers off, turning a little bit down toward the edge. Most people's eyebrows will extend a little bit beyond their eye off to the left and right sides. Just how much, again, depends on the person, but as you can see, we're looking at a little bit of extension beyond the actual eye. And that's kind of part of that orbit or socket of the eye right here. On the skull, it would correspond to that larger opening of the eye. All right, so eyebrow, eyeball, nose. Placement of the lips compared to the nose and the chin. It's roughly going to be 1/3 of the way down from the nose to the chin. So if this is our halfway point, somewhere in here, we're looking at more of 1/3. So I'm going to draw a line that I'm guesstimating to be 1/3, and then I'm going to double check myself. So from the base of the nose, we got 1, 2, 3, a little bit higher, but right around there is pretty close to where I want to be. Now, for starters, I make a fairly flat line. That's going to actually be the line between the upper and lower lip is what we're looking at. Now, if you curve this line too much upward or downward, you're going to get a frown or a smile. I'm trying to keep it fairly straight right now for starters. The width of the mouth, this is a tricky one. Everybody's mouth, some people have a little bit of a wider set mouth, but one really good way to double check this would be The outer edge, the right side and the left side of the lips should fall somewhere toward the middle of the eyeballs, maybe middle, just the inner middle of the eyeballs. So if I make it look like our person is crying here, a line that comes more or less straight down from roughly center or maybe just inside center of the eyes. I'm going to shoot those lines down. Notice equal distance from the middle on both sides, roughly. Those should be somewhere around there, should be the corners of our lips right in here. That's how wide we're looking. If it looks a little too wide right now or too small, keep in mind everybody's a little different. So it depends on what our model is looking like. Now, most people, the middle line of the lips, you're going to see something kind of similar. In the very center, right at that center point, there's going to be a bit of a downward turn, a divot. So almost a very gradual U shape. A slight uphill rise, and then back downwards a little bit toward the corner of the mouth. So think of like the wings of a, I don't know, seagull. Everybody's done a drawing like that. I don't know, in the sketchbook or something. You know, you make a landscape and kind of have a little bit of a seagull's wings flying around. It's a little bit of that sort of a look. Let me do that a little lower so you can actually see it. But maybe a little less, what's the word? Less aggressive than that. Okay, but that's the kind of general feel I'm going for. So that's, again, the middle line separating the upper and lower lip. Now to show upper lip, I'm going to do a very similar type of line, but on top. So this is now the upper edge of the upper lip. Once again, this will get very, very thin out toward the left and right edge. It's thickest toward the middle. Now, just how thick you want to choose to make this totally depends on your model, the person that you're drawing. I'm going to make this fairly thin. This is a little more of a masculine drawing I'm making right now. Now, on most people, the upper lip is going to cast more shadow, so I'll shade that just a little bit because it'll look a little more realistic. Okay, and now you can kind of see this coming along. Lower lip, for the most part, is going to be a little bit wider on most people. I start with a fairly flat edge, a little bit deeper set than the upper lip was. Downward turn, downward angle here. Somewhere in that zone would be perfect. All right, I'm not going to get too much more specific because, again, we'll talk lip, nose, eye structure later on. So that's a really good placement of the features. Now, if you're still thinking like this kind of looks like a mask, it doesn't look quite human, keep in mind a couple things. So one, I haven't talked about hair or ear placement yet. When it comes to, let's say, the ears, I'm going to use this as a general edge to the temple down into the cheek. Now, keep in mind that most people are going to have a much more specifically kind of chiseled out edge to their faces, where the jawline would be, and you can kind of see that coming into play now. But for right now, I'm going to keep it kind of loose because this is just a very, again, generic kind of a view. So more or less, most people's ears, the tips of the ears in a frontal view, are going to be around the brow or around the upper eyelid or maybe somewhere in between. For this guy, I'm going to go somewhere in between. So a light line right in between, that's going to be the very tip top of the ear cartilage. The base of the ear, like if your ear was pierced, would be around the nose line for most people in a front-facing view. So now I've got the bottom of the ear, the top of the ear, and I can kind of start to more or less attach that to my person's head here. Now again, specific shapes, ear shapes, we could talk about that forever. We'll talk about the features a little bit more down the road. Right now it looks like my left ear is a little further off to the side. Once again, that's because this is a pretty generic drawing and I haven't really chiseled out the edges of the face just yet, but somewhere around that area is going to be close for where we want to be. Okay, when you get into locking in a bit of a jaw shape, keep in mind that where the face bends from, first we have cheek, comes out and turns downhill from kind of more of the cheek and then down into the jaw and chin line. Keep in mind that where that bend is at the jaw is going to be very close to level with the actual line of the lips, where we get that turn into jaw and then chin. All right, so that's getting a little more specific, looking even more human now. And then the last thing would be a hairline. Now this, of course, is super different for everyone. You could have somebody who's balding, no hair at all, long hair, all that good stuff. I'm just gonna do a kind of standard male haircut right here, because I hope what this will show you is somebody looking much more human, much more believable here. So keep in mind that this line here is more of a skull, kind of like the cranium look. So I wanna look at, this would be if somebody had kind of a full head of hair, maybe a short to medium men's haircut. So I'm looking at the hair kind of piling up on the side of the head. Definitely that hair is going to extend up and over the actual cranium or skull line here. And then let's say this person has a part over on this side. You got a little hair kind of swooping down over the forehead. Some, I guess you'd call these the sideburns over here. A little bit of hair that comes out over the ear. And then again, pretty quickly you can see, hopefully, that person is looking much more human, much more believable all of a sudden. So keep in mind, it's gonna look very strange until you've attended to the hair. Now be careful that you don't start the hairline way up here at the top of the skull. Remember, that's the very back of the actual the tip top of the head. That's not necessarily where the hair starts to grow. The hairline would be here, and this person has long hair that's kind of coming down over the forehead. So super important to remember. Now, this same thing we can kind of translate into a version over here of more or less a similar view, but let's talk 3/4, and specifically for my class right now, we're talking about the 3/4 viewpoint quite a bit. So over here on the side, I'm gonna do pretty much the same thing. I'm gonna start with a circular form, trying to make that as true of a circle as I can. I'm gonna try to keep this about the same size, roughly. Double checking myself, width of this circle versus height. Okay, pretty close, that's a good sign. Now the big difference here is going to be that I'm gonna be in a 3/4 view. So instead of looking straight on, we're looking at a human head, we'll say looking in this direction. So when I put in and start to think about where I want a jawline to come down, I'm thinking cheek would be right in this area, jawline comes downhill, get to the chin. Now the big change over here is going to be, I'm gonna have a little more space to the back of the head because we're looking from the side. And I'm also gonna see a good chunk of the side plane of the head here. So I'm gonna carve this out a little bit like this is a machine right now. It's not gonna look quite humanoid. Again, jawline comes down and over into the chin. Okay, so you can start to see, hopefully this would be like the temple area where we move from forehead, side plane of the head, somewhere around this area, back of the head where the hair would be falling back. Again, we may have to toggle or kind of tweak the edge of the brow and the cheek eventually, but this is a good starting point. Eyebrow would be somewhere around here, cheek, just to give you a sense. All right. Now in this case, the reason I know that is my eyebrow line is right about here on this one. So I can kind of extend my line. Okay, that's where the brow will kind of bulge out, the cheek right around here. The actual line of the eyes we already have drawn out because we're using this line. Now in this view where I'm twisting the head sideways, very, very important early on is to lock down about a middle-ish line for where I want my features to line up. Now when I draw this middle line, I slightly curve it because I know this is a head, three-dimensional head in space, which means that nothing's going to be totally flat for the most part on this person's face. So this thing's moving a little bit. It appears to be a little bit rounded in that direction. Just how much you round that is a little bit of a personal preference, but you kind of have to straddle that line of two-dimensional versus too flat. When I say two-dimensional, I mean T-O-O, too extremely dimensional. Okay, so now that I blocked that in, again, in this sense, or in this particular drawing, I'm looking at the kind of bulge of the brow. To make this a little more specific, we'd be looking at a forehead here, going back in space. And again, a little bit of a cheekbone is probably what we'd be looking at. Now, again, I'm not drawing anybody too particular. I'm just going for a little bit generic here. So we could do exactly the same thing we did before, roughly. But what I'm going to start to do is think about eyebrows. We already kind of established where those are going to go because of this line right here, following from the other drawing. So the eyebrow is going to come downhill and join right into the bridge of the nose. Now I know where that bridge of the nose should be, relatively, because of this middle line right here. So bridge of the nose is going to start somewhere right across the mid feature line. And that means my next eyebrow, or the right brow, should start right in this area. So you can see how I'm using this middle line here to establish this same shape, but in perspective. So now you can see it twisted to the side a bit more. I know that's a little bit maybe hard to wrap your brain around or to see because I'm just getting started, but let me just work a little bit further just to show you what I mean. So now I'm looking at the bridge of the nose, just like I had before. Bottom of the nose, roughly straight across there. Again, now building this nose out, still 1, 2, 3 main sides. All right, and hopefully that's starting to make a little bit of sense and come together for you now that I drew that nose out a little bit more. Sometimes when you're just starting with one piece, it can feel a little bit abstract or hard to really read, like where's this guy going with this? But hopefully you can kind of follow along there. So again, if we were shading the whole bottom half of the nose that normally falls into shadow, we're looking at a little bit of shadow there. All right. When it comes to the actual placement of the eyes themselves, still we could use this major line, but one small difference is going to be that we're going to, this eye on our left side, our model's right eye, is going to appear to kind of hide slightly behind the nose. Keep in mind that the nose actually is a dimensional part of the face sticking out and can absolutely kind of hide a portion of the eye for sure. So that's point number one to keep in mind. So it's okay to let this corner of the eye kind of sit right behind the actual bridge of the nose. Another thing to keep in mind is that when we look at this eye, not to squish it into the bridge of the nose. So if I was shading this one more time, I'm going to lightly shade this half. Let's say our light's coming from this side. It's important to remember this is all the edge of your nose. If you push on the side of your nose, it's where your glasses would rest, right in here. So the actual eyeball isn't going to start until quite a bit further back, somewhere back in this direction. I know it seems that seems a bit extreme, but you need to give, again, that nose a little bit of room to breathe here. Now, what I mentioned here where you can count, okay, one eye width, there's another eye width in the middle, doesn't quite work. In some views it may, but it doesn't quite work the same because we're now in perspective a little bit. So again, I always try to make sure that this eye doesn't encroach or push on the corner of my nose. Give it an ample amount of space, but somewhere in this sort of region feels pretty good to me. And then we'd have an eyelid somewhere around here. Again, not getting too specific about the features, but just trying to block them in a very generic way. So now we'd be looking at eyebrow. Again, a bit of a downward curve. So the meat of the eyebrow right here. Distance from brow to the eye, as you can see, I'm a little closer here. That totally depends on the person we're drawing from. That could change with our model. Okay. And then in a similar way, now I'm looking at, let's go ahead and try to find the midline of the lips. Now the lips in perspective here, a little bit tricky, nothing too crazy, but I have to make sure I'm looking at, okay, this is the midline of the nose right here. as that turns around the nose, it's going to go downhill and back out across the lips. The midline of my lips is right around this area. So remember, your middle line is something that's constantly moving along with every other part of your head. If you were an ant crawling across the forehead, down the bridge of the nose, back up, up, and then back, looping around, right? So if you think about this in a three-dimensional kind of a way, that midline is never one straight kind of an edge. So that's important to remember, to make sure you know where that line should be located, so we know where the midline of the lip should be down the road. Now keep in mind the midline of the lips, again, about a third of the way from bottom of the nose to the chin, roughly in this area. Now here in particular, that line of the lips, I don't believe is ever going to be totally straight, because I'm now looking at this head wrapping around in space a bit. I'm going to go with a slightly downward turn. That's the particular model I'm kind of looking at right now, has that look to the lips. Now, keep this in mind for sure. The corner of the lips over here, I only have so much room because of the edge of my face. So if I did a straight line up, probably somewhere in the middle of the eye is where the edge of that lip would still line up. Now if I do a straight line up from the right edge of the lip, I'm looking at somewhere in the corner of the eye probably. So roughly speaking, something like this. Now that's going to change depending on your angle, depending on your model and how big the lips are for sure. But again, that's the middle. I'm going to add an upper lip and then the lower lip, which I'll make a little bit fuller. All right. Beautiful. So we have most of the features locked in. If you wanted to place an ear here, similar kind of an issue or spacing. So top of the ear is going to line up just below the brow. Now where this is going to hit on the head now is going to be much further back, close to the edge of the head in this particular view. Again, this changes on just how much of a profile view are we looking at. Depends on your perspective a bit. Base of the ear. And coming from behind the ear, we'll have the neck in this view. Somewhere in this region. Now the whole back of the head, that's where we would add hair, depending on your hairstyle. We could do anything there. So generally speaking, this would be a really good guideline or basis to start with. Now, this is a pretty generic head, but I was looking at a bit of reference. Again, I'll share that with you. This one I was definitely looking at reference because I'm not the best. I'm going to be totally upfront with you. I'm not the best at just pulling this stuff out of thin air and making it all up. I love to have a reference, especially if I'm looking at 3/4 view, a profile view, any of that kind of thing. So I find that super helpful. I think that this method and kind of employing that Loomis method that I mentioned in the skull video, where you start with the sphere, block out a chin line, and then you can find what kind of a direction you want your head to be looking in. I find it to be 100% super helpful. All the time I can change the angle. I can have my person looking slightly uphill. I can really quickly establish what direction the head is going in, and it does help me if I'm starting to make anything up at all, which again, not my forte, but if I didn't have this system kind of embedded in my head a little bit, I'd be totally lost. So I think it's good to have this rooted in your mind. I don't, again, necessarily think you have to follow this method every time you're drawing a portrait. So I'll leave that up to you. But for what it's worth, as you illustrators, animators, anybody who's working from your own imagination, I think it's super helpful to have this rooted and this information kind of locked into the brain.